Hello everyone, my name is Eric Lee and I'm president of Asian Institute of International Law. Today we have the honor to have an interview with Professor Jayakumar at the National University of Singapore. As one of the most highly renowned international lawyers of our time, Professor Jayakumar was educated at Raffles Institution and studied law at the National University of Singapore and Yale Law School. He taught international law at the National University of Singapore and served as the Dean of the Law Faculty. Then he began working for the government as a permanent representative to the United Nations. Later, he was appointed as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Home Affairs, Law, Labor, Deputy Prime Minister, and Senior Minister before coming back to academia. Professor Jayakumar is a prolific writer, publishing many books and articles with various topics of international law. In particular, the latest work, Diplomacy, has been attracting great readership from all over the world. Thank you very much for giving me the privilege of interviewing you. I'd like to just begin this interview with one important question regarding your personal story. You were born in 1939 in a Tamil Indian family. Would you please talk about your family background, your childhood, and your parents' education, and what brought you to study international law?
Well, my childhood was not a very eventful one. It was the period after the war, during and after the war. The times were hard. My father had been born in India, not very well educated, and he came to Singapore to earn a livelihood, and he probably intended to return back. But he met my mother, and my mother had been born here, and they were married, and this affected his plans. So finally, they decided to stay in Singapore, and they had 7 children, and I'm the fifth child. So it is a story typical of many third-generation Singaporeans. I consider myself a third-generation Singaporean, where their forefathers, either the fathers or the grandfathers, had come from India or China, and through just determination and hard work, they made it, and they were able to raise a family and provide better education for the children than the education they had. So, like many others in my generation, we really owe it to my parents, and my mother was not educated at all, and most of my siblings were educated up to secondary school or university.
Oh, great.
So, yes. So, I think this is typical of many families in Singapore where our forebears came from far away. So, what made me study international law? I did my legal studies at the National University of Singapore. And I was attracted to first academia because the subjects that I taught, or the subjects I was interested in, like constitutional law, international law, public international law, there was not much potential in the practice of law in Singapore. And around the time I graduated, there was a round table of international law held in Singapore, and I was asked to be the rapporteur for the conference, and I met Myers McDougall from Yale Law School, who I found very impressive and inspiring, and he persuaded me to apply to Yale Law School. And that's where I began to take a deeper interest in international law.
What is a Raffles Institution? So
Raffles Institution,
very famous one.
Raffles Institution is a premier secondary school. It's So school system is primary school, secondary school. Nowadays, after secondary school, you go to junior college. But in my time, we didn't have a junior college. So secondary school is the phase before you go to the university.
Is it still
Yes.
going on?
Yes.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
So I heard that Radcliffe institution delivered many great some alumni.
Yes, because it's one of the oldest institutions.
Tommy Cole,
Yes.
Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew also graduated from
Yes.
Radcliffe institution.
Yes.
And in Europe, you said the first meeting with Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew had a huge impact on your understanding of interplay between national interest, international agreement, and international law. Would you just explain more about your thought in this matter?
Well, when I was in politics, I was appointed Minister of State for Law and Home Affairs. And Home Affairs, of course, is like Ministry of the Interior. And you have to grapple with many law and order issues. And had to work closely with Prime Minister Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. It was very interesting because he was not only a visionary leader for Singapore, but he was also a very brilliant lawyer.
Right, Kate.
Having studied in Cambridge.
Cambridge law. Right.
But he was a pragmatic lawyer. So, in having to make this tiny island, which has no real resources, and with so many different races, languages, and religions, and with a history of communist insurgency, with a history of racial riots.
Yeah, riots, right.
How to make it a successful and thriving independent country after we separated from Malaysia was a huge challenge.
Right.
So he had his policies, but as you know, the policies often need a legal underpinning and has to have a legal formulation and implementation. So he is a leader, but at the same time with a legal background. He had his own philosophy of the role of law in shaping the growth of the society, whether it's the law in economy, law in security, law in land utilization. Every aspect of the growth of Singapore obviously needed an interplay between policy and law. And
overcoming challenges.
so his approach was not a purist or abstract approach to law. And he wanted Singapore to succeed, he wanted Singapore to grow against all odds, and the law had to play a role in furthering these social, economic, and political objectives. So, in working with him, I could see the pragmatism that he had. I mean, you mentioned to me how clean Singapore is, right? But that doesn't come about just by chance. You can educate people on the need to keep the streets litter free. But human nature is difficult to expect to operate on its own. I think he believed, and I still believe, that the natural order of things is disorder.
Right. Sure. Kind of
So,
technology is going
yeah.
this
So-
right. This is natural, right?
So we have very strict laws
Right.
on, for example, graffiti.
Right.
You don't find any graffiti on the walls or in vehicles. Very strict laws on people who deliberately litter, right? And the laws have to be enforced. That's one very simple example. then when many societies are afflicted by corruption, we had to have very strict laws and strict enforcement of the laws concerning corruption. Right? Whether you are a high-level official or minister to a lower functionary, the message had to be that Singapore is corrupt-free, as possible. Right?
When you start, yes, side.
So, but corruption is very difficult to prove in a court of law. How do you prove that the money you have in your bank account is legitimately derived? So his approach, typical approach, was to reverse the presumption. In other words, if you have assets and wealth which cannot be accounted by your known sources of income, then the presumption is reversed. You have to show that it is not due to ill-gotten gains.
So, when we were arriving at Singapore at the first time, we listened to the announcement that you're welcome to the artificial paradise. So you mean just a kind of human nature is going to disalter? I fully agree with that. And Singapore has been developing very fast, as you just said, in both social and economic areas. So she's admired as a miracle creator, the myth of Asia. But however, there was a criticism against one-party system, power succession, and high rate of usage of death penalty, especially the tight political control over civil society. I think your previous statement would be a response to this kind of criticism. Would you please to give me some more excuse, or not excuse, but a response to this criticism?
You have said several things there. But it's not when you said that it's tightly controlled and one-party system. I'm not sure if you have followed the developments, especially in the last elections, which saw many political parties make gains in the electoral process. So, although the People's Action Party, the government party, is dominant, it is not a one party, because there are several other parties. And several parties are represented in the parliament.
In the parliament, but that's nominal. People say it's nominal.
Well,
just one, two.
I think
one, two parliament seats, right?
You should. I think you should read about the last elections. The political landscape has changed considerably. The key question is, are the elections fair? Are the elections open, and is the electoral system secret? No one, not even the opposition, has alleged that the elections is clean and honest. Which means what? That means if the party has obtained 60% of the votes, it got the majority of seats or 2/3 of the seats, why is that not taken as a reflection of the majority? Because the opposition could have been elected to more seats.
Don't you think that the People's Action Party just to politically control the political opponents by enforcing law? Because you said the law enforcement is very strict here in Singapore. But the structure, if this political structure is like that, the political opponents could not.
But not in politics, because political parties are free to operate. they're free to. The rules as to politicking are the same for the opposition party as for the ruling party. There's nothing that the ruling party can do which the opposition parties cannot do. For example, electioneering. So the only lines that are drawn in terms of speech is race, language, and religion. This is not only for electioneering, even outside electioneering. Anybody who tries to create mischief on race, language, or religion, these are taboo areas, and we are very strict on that.
Right.
Even if a government parliamentarian were to say something that's offensive to him, that he would apologize. So race, language, and religion are very sensitive areas. But if you studied the recent elections, you would have concluded that there was no serious impediment politically for political parties to try to win the hearts and minds. I'll give you an example. We had a constituency known as Aljunied, A-L-J-U-N-I-D, Aljunied, right? Where several MPs stood together and opposition tried to win over that constituency.
And it's a shadow cabinet.
No. It was contested.
Contested. Really?
There are some constituencies single members. Some constituencies are multiple members, right? It is known as a group representation constituency. Now, the leader man for us in that constituency was a very popular foreign minister, Yong-Joong. Very, very effective, popular foreign minister. And the ruling party's team, led by our foreign minister, was defeated. Defeated. So I think you need to do some reading about the last election. Now, if it's true that PAP controls the electoral process, how is it that we lost? Aljunied.
Okay, right.
Had lost a very, very effective foreign minister. And not only one foreign minister, there was another minister in that team, a lady minister, and a deputy minister. So we lost a foreign minister, a deputy minister, another full minister in that one seat.
In that one seat.
So I think that speaks for itself. Your other question about penalties, harsh or tough punishments. That's why I gave you the book.
So
I think the answer to that is there a universal prescription for the kinds of laws on any particular area? I think every country must follow whatever international law is prescribed, whatever human rights and rule of law prescriptions that apply universally. Subject to its parameters, every society needs to work out what is the body of laws, what is its philosophy of legal system, as well as the appropriate legal instruments and penalties to deal with their own circumstances. So, for example, some countries do not have the death penalty. Some countries have the death penalty, do not enforce. We have the death penalty, particularly for drug offences, murder, and firearms, and we enforce them. Now, yes, sometimes we are criticized, but that depends on your own philosophy on capital punishment. I recognize that there are many views on capital punishment, but having been in the Minister of Home Affairs for some years, I think it does work. It is a deterrent. And don't forget that we are located at the heart of the Golden Triangle for drugs trafficking, and because of shipping and airport communications, we are easy gateway for trafficking. So if we were not tough, not only would Singapore be flooded with drugs, we'd also be a conduit for Australia and other countries. So we take a tough stand for entry into drugs. We also take a tough stand on being a conduit to other countries. So even a person was transiting with drugs, we would. Then take the issue of firearms. Some countries, like the United States, have a different approach on gun control. For us, because we have very strict laws on gun control, I think in any 1 year, the number of firearms offences would be no more than 4 or 5. No more than 4. In fact, even when a policeman pulls out his gun and fires a shot, that will be front page news because it rarely happens. So how do we do that when the region is full of weapons smuggling? I think it's because of tough laws. So, but come back, each country has to decide on its corpus of laws, its philosophy towards law and punishment. But as I explained in my monograph, it comes back to a broader question as to what is your philosophy on the balance on the rights of the individual versus the rights of the overall society. The point I make there is that generally speaking, I think in the West they probably leaned too much to the rights of the individual, and therefore the overall societal group has suffered. I think in Singapore and for most Asian societies, we tend to place higher priority on the overall societal and community's interests. That is not to say that there are no individual rights, but in the balance, I think we tilt more to the overall societal rights.
Yeah, you're saying about the very philosophical some basis of the law and enforcement in a society. In connection with this statement and this problem, I'd like to talk with you more about the meaning of so-called Asian values. Right, in 1994, there was a debate between Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew and the former President of Korea, Kim regarding the application of Western democracy into Asia. In the conversation with Foreign Affairs as well, the Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew suggested that Western concept of democracy and especially human rights would not work in Asia. But in responding article, the President Kim Dae-jung strongly maintained that Asia's destiny would be to improve the Western democracy. What do you think about Kim Dae-jung's recognition of democracy, and does Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew's preaching still have relevance in Asia and Singapore?
I don't have the exact quotes by Mr. Lee Kuan Yew or Premier Kim Dae-jung. But I'd like to get away. I'd like to get away from, shall I say, generalization that Western democracy will not work or will work. Rather, I would like to focus on what would be the ideal ingredients to go into good governance. At the end of the day, you need to have good governance. Whether you call it democracy or whatever, a good governance means, a good governance together with the rule of law means several essential ingredients that governments must operate on the basis of limits. There must be limits to governmental power. That governments must derive their legitimacy from the will of the people. And there must be checks on exercise of governmental power. And in order to bring this about, you need a judiciary which is independent. So these basic aspects have to be there, whether it is an Asian country or Western country. So you can give it any label, whether it came from the West or whatever. So I think Asian societies, by the very nature of being an Asian society, cannot claim that certain universal provisions should not apply. But I do believe that subject to universally applicable principles, and of course there can be debate on what is universally applicable. I mean, take the death penalty. I do not believe that there's an international law which forbids the death penalty. Right? Subject to that, I think societies must evolve according to their own particular circumstances. Take Singapore. It's your first visit, but I would encourage you to go into the city and walk around. We are what? We are just about 400 square kilometers. 400 square kilometers with no natural resources, with a population of more than 4 million. We are one of the most, if not the most densely populated country in the world. Over 90% of the population live in high-rise flats. Then Chinese, like Indians, Malays, race, language, religion differences. The potential for misunderstanding, the potential for racial, linguistic, and religious strife are always there. So we don't make any excuses for taking a tough position in anyone who would want to create a mischief in these areas. Now, how do you compare that with some European countries where you can, under freedom of information, say something very bad about another religion? I mean, you publish a cartoon of a prophet Muhammad in Denmark or wherever, you're allowed to do that. You do that here, you'll have a race riot. So that's what I mean by every society has got to work out its own circumstances and how do you proceed.
Okay.
But they should not invoke your national circumstances as an excuse, for non-observance of internationally prescribed human rights.
Right. So thank you for your good answer about the philosophy of basis and rule of law in Singapore. And now I'd like to ask you some competitive question about the identity of Singapore. Some people would regard Singapore as an outpost of the United Kingdom in Asia. What is national identity of Singapore? UK or Asia?
Definitely not UK.
No.
Well, you look at the composition of Singapore. 75 or 76% of the population are Chinese origin. About 15 to 16% Malays. About 8% Indians. But it's very cosmopolitan because we have a very open approach to immigration. There are tens of thousands of Korean nationals here.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands. Of which 7,000 are permanent residents. Applied for permanent residents.
Really?
Similarly, Australians, British, Americans. There are tens of thousands. Want to come here, work here, live here. Which is another answer, by the way, to your question about tight control, no human rights.
Yeah.
If it's that terrible a place, why do so many people want to come and live here? Right? Yeah, sure, go ahead. So Singapore, when you say identity, I would first say that we have to be modest. Are we a nation? I don't think we are a nation yet. We are a society which is trying to be a nation because we were not intended to be an independent country. Yes, we got separated from Malaysia. Yes, we were part of Malaysia.
You're saying you gave up some sovereignty of Singapore as
Well,
a nation?
we were not an independent country. We were British territory. And then together with the Borneo territories, we joined Malaya to form Malaysia. We were a state within Malaysia.
Right, in 1960.
But it's a long story, but because of very, very difficult problems we had with Lee Kuan Yew and his team with the leaders of Malaysia, much of it turning on racial aspects, there was a mutual agreement to separate. So overnight, both sides agreed to separate. So one day we were part of Malaysia, the next day we were independent. Yes.
So
that's what happened.
Overnight independence. Yeah.
9th August 1965. So before we went into Malaysia, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew had to persuade the electorate that we have to go into Malaysia. We must become part of Malaysia. Independent Singapore has no future. So when we became independent, he had to pursue. No, he had to get the people to say, look, we can make it. We have no resources, but we will make it as an independent country. But what is a nation? So I believe that nationhood takes a long time to develop. We have 3 different groups of people: Indians, Chinese, Malays, with roots from your different countries. How do you get these 3 groups to think of themselves as Singaporeans? It takes several generations, and they must feel that this is their home, or destiny is with Southeast Asia and East Asia, our destiny is not with China, not with India. I'm of Indian origin,
Yeah,
right? But I don't think and feel as an Indian. I think and feel as a Singaporean. The present generation of Chinese also. The present generation of Malays don't feel like they're ASEANs. Right. Now, if we succeed in that, then we will succeed in having a national identity. So others have to decide. And it's very important because we are located in Southeast Asia and our destiny must be with Southeast Asia and it's ASEAN. Now, you talk about British. Our major trading partners are China, India, our neighboring countries, United States, and United Kingdom is still an important trading partner, but it's not the top.
Not the top of the trading partner.
So, I think the answer to the question is that the national identity of Singapore is still in progress.
It's progress, right? Okay. But compare the Singaporean situation with another much multiple ethnic society like United States and China. They have more than 50 or 60 ethnicities in the society, but they are nations. So you have a constitution, you have sovereignty to the international community. Then you should be regarded as a nation, as one nation. But you think the nationality, kind of national identity is still in progress. That's quite interesting.
I think we must have a sense of history. The United States has how many decades of has it taken to evolve?
Just 150, right?
150.
Yeah, 150.
Now,
of course, their whole history more than 200, but there was national society, right?
Singapore was founded by the British in 1819. So the colonial history of Singapore begins in 1819, right? But the modern history of Singapore begins in 1965. 1965, 40, 50, 45 years is very short. So we have to, I think it's important for our people, especially the younger generation, not to take what they see as for granted, that we have to work hard to make sure what we have is sustained, and there are challenges ahead. I think it would be wrong to think that we have arrived, we are a nation. History is full of countries, small countries which have come and gone. You know, Venice was at its heydays, right? But for small countries, the big challenges. And
even now.
Yes.
Even now.
And therefore, I would be the last to say that Singapore has arrived and it's a nation. I would like to think that we are a nation still in evolution.
Right.
And we cannot take it for granted.
Right. So let's change our discussion into more global affairs. Following the 2011 dollar index, the value of the US dollar has been declining to below 70% of that of 1973. In recent years, the US hedging power is getting less dominant in East Asia, while China is becoming more influential. How do you expect the competition between the two hedging powers in East Asia to evolve? And what is the national strategy to deal with this changing environment?
I don't see I don't see a bleak scenario. Yes, there will be competition between the United States and China in some areas. Some of the competition may lead to some tensions. but I think both will manage it because it's neither's interest to have a conflict. I don't think either the United States or the Chinese will want conflict. So I think they will manage it, whether in the economic sphere or whether you talk about South China Sea or whatever. There are certain red lines, of course. I think the United States knows that Taiwan is a red line situation.
In the Korean Peninsula, right?
Korean Peninsula, I don't think the Korean Peninsula is one of the hot issues where Chinese and the United States have fundamental disagreements. I think both China and the United States have a shared interest in not having tensions or conflict in the Korean Peninsula. It's neither the United States nor China's interest to have North Korea ignore the international community's call for nuclear proliferation. They have a shared interest. Although, as you know, the Chinese way to approach North Koreans differs from the United States. But I think they both have a shared interest in what goes on in the Korean Peninsula.
But you're saying you just said that the two having powers would share their interest in East Asia, but differently there are many conflicts we could see, especially as you just said right ago, the South China Sea. There was a big conflict ongoing between China and Vietnam, but Vietnam is not just people regarding this conflict as the competition between the China and United States, right, for the navigation privilege on the South China Sea, which is the biggest regional maritime area instead of any big fixed the oceans. So I and many people have different idea about this hegemonic powers competition in East Asia because retrospecting the past half a century, United States would not yield their some national interest in East Asia, especially in the 21st century. How do you think about this?
Let me answer the question in a very broad way. That my own thinking is, Singapore's thinking is that it is the best situation is to have as many external players be engaged in our region, rather than to have one or two dominant players. So that's why we have advocated India's participation in regional matters. We have advocated the United States' continued engagement in the region. We continue to believe in that. Now, specifically on South China Sea, I don't think the external players should get involved in the specific resolution of individual claims and counterclaims. That should be left to the disputing parties. I mean, who has sovereignty over which island or rock. But when the international community, even non-claimant states, whether a big country like the United States or a small country like Singapore, has a legitimate interest, is twofold. One is, we have an interest that the way in which the South China Sea claims are dealt with does not lead to tensions or conflict and therefore cause instability in the region. We have a legitimate interest in that. Second is, Singapore as an important port where ships come and go. It's important to us that the competing claimants observe the sea lanes navigation in the important sea lanes of communication. and observe the UNCLOS rules. Right? So you may have your claims, but as the two competing claimants resolve the issue, we need to be assured that they will not in any way disregard what international law says about freedom of navigation. The United States is in interest there, but so do other countries.
How about the future of ASEAN and your perspective of what should Singapore do in the future for ASEAN? The ASEAN market, So Singapore is a central country of the Asian world.
Singapore is one of the smallest countries in ASEAN.
Coordinating country, you are doing very well in coordinating.
Singapore is a small country and we are a small member of ASEAN. But ASEAN is important to us because, but let me say first, ASEAN cannot aspire to be a political bloc of its own. But where ASEAN can play a useful role is to be a facilitator, facilitator for other countries to be engaged in the region. Take ASEAN Regional Forum, for example. ASEAN came out with this idea for ARF. And ASEAN chairs the ARF. I believe that other countries are comfortable, big powers are comfortable with ASEAN being in the driver's seat of ARF.
ARF means
ASEAN Regional Forum.
Asian Regional Forum.
ASEAN.
ASEAN, yeah.
And we are not a threat. So, supposing the ARF was chaired by Japan, or Japan has a meeting and says, all of you come to Tokyo, we are going to chair the ARF. Or Beijing says, now you all come to China, I'm going to chair the ARF. Or United States says, you all come to Washington. It takes on a different coloration. But if Brunei, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam says, look, this year is our turn to host the ARF. Can you all come? It takes on a different complexion altogether. And that's where ASEAN, I think, can play a role.
Okay, and personally, Korea is the only place on the globe where the Cold War is still in place. Thus, reunification of Korea is thus the most important task for peace and security and prosperity, both for Koreans as well as neighboring countries. Following your experience as a scholar as well as a politician, what should Koreans do first to achieve this dream of reunification?
I hesitate to answer the question because I am not sufficiently clued in as to what is the thinking of the current generation of your generation.
You're not my generation, younger generation.
Yes,
right.
of Koreans.
Right.
With the passage of time, is reunification still seriously espoused and seriously believed in by the younger generation of Koreans? If the answer is yes, then I think, because no leader, I think from the little I know, the reunification, although it's, as you say, a dream, the reunification has, we learned from the German experience, a lot of ramifications, right? Economic, political, and so on. First and foremost, there needs to be courageous and bold leadership on both sides to make the decision, right? But no leader, I'm talking about South Korea, no leader would be able to do that unless he believes that he has the support of the people.
Right.
So, but you got to educate me. You can do that over lunch. What is the overall sentiments of the
Right.
generation?
Nowadays, the people, the younger generations, getting more interested in the reunification the two Koreas, because previously, politically, the leadership of two Koreas needed very opposite leadership in the other, right? But that's why in outside they pretend to follow the reunification, but in the actual domestic policy, I don't think they try to promote a reunification. But now it's different because the Cold War was over all over the globe, except for the Korean Peninsula. So the time is coming very fast to come for Korea to achieve the goal. So and that's the national goal for Korea to be reunified in the 21st century. So I'm definitely saying that it should be yes. So and I'm especially asking you about the reunification, not because you're just one of the highly renowned international lawyer, but also you're a Singaporean lawyer who served as a foreign minister. Because I have been very impressed by the racial harmonization. This kind of division is that of the conflict following the ideological divisions. So there are some disharmonization in Korea between the Korean people, among Korean peoples. They are due to the ideological conflict and regional separation and sometimes religious conflict in the domestic society of Korea. So that's why if we infer some lessons from the Singaporean experience on the regional harmonization, we could overcome the barrier between the line between the two Koreas. So,
I doubt very much whether the Singapore experience would be helpful because from what I know, you have on your side a generation that's grown up under a totally different system of democracy and openness, exposure to ideas in the West, and with the economy that's a major economy. On the other side, you had a very closed society, operated under one strong ruler, which has not had exposure to the outside world, and economically not doing well. So the closest parallel I can think of in recent history would be what happened in Germany. I think I can't think of any other analogous situation than the two Germanys reuniting. Same peoples have been separated, one under the Soviet tutelage and one was exposed to the West. And how they got together and how did the post-merger and reunification problems get solved. I think that would offer better lessons than Singapore, because we did not
Singapore,
have
yeah, the way back to Singapore. Okay, so I will give you some personal question. Your career has been a true model of success for an international lawyer. For the nearly past 40 years, you were in the center of national governance. I wonder if you have any frustration over the course of your career in your life? If so, how did you overcome that?
Of course, you have frustrations because the frustrations would be not so much personal, but one's always impatient to see the results of policies. But fortunately in Singapore, the government works as a team, right? And I've worked under 3 prime ministers, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, and Mr. Lee Hsien Loong. And every one of these prime ministers had a very good grasp of the challenges that Singapore faces. And my worry is whether the younger generation has good understanding of the fragility and the vulnerability of Singapore. And we face a lot of problems. You know. Take for example, one of the problems which the present government is facing, and that is low fertility rates. Birth rates. We are of our what they call total fertility rate is less than the replacement, 1.4 or 1.5. Married couples, they're not replacing themselves. So your demography will change. But what is the solution? You can give as many incentives to married couples to have more children, but it's very difficult because of various reasons. And so we have to immigrate more. But when we immigrated more, there's a political backlash.
Yeah, that's right.
So the people don't want so many foreigners. So we have to scale
More
it.
foreigners.
We have to scale it back.
Yeah.
But the choice is, if we don't immigrate in significant numbers, and your birth rate is low, then looking to the future, will you settle for slower growth? I mean, it's either one or the other. You cannot have continued growth when your companies and industries are asking for people.
Right.
So these are some of the dilemmas that the government and the people have to resolve. That's what I come back to the question. Have we arrived? Are we already a nation? You know, doesn't follow. So yes, you have frustrations because you want Singapore to continue to grow and prosper, but you need good leadership and electorate and a population that understands, you know, what are the challenges that lie.
You're a very lucky man because you didn't have some serious personal frustration in your life. I envy you very much for that. How do you expect the 21st century? Is this kind of human brutality still going on, you think, in the 21st century in the international community? Wow, so I was very... How do you expect the 21st century, is this kind of human brutality still going on in the 21st century?
Well, in a sense, you can extrapolate to the international plane what I told you about the natural order of things is disorder. I think the kinds of problems which will see tensions will evolve. I think 20 years, 30 years down the line, we may have problems related to climate change. People in search of people who are driven out by sheer changes to their landscape, either through flooding or through severe drought. You must have read of all the scenarios. There are many scenarios. So I expect conflicts and tensions to arise from the effects of climate change in about 20, 30 years' time. And societies have no choice but try to cross borders, try to flee to other countries by boat or across the borders, and that will see major new kinds of problems.
Wow, that's just some great lesson from senior international lawyer in climate change. Would you please give us a piece of advice to young international lawyers in Asia preparing for the global society?
I think that I'd like to see international lawyers in Asia get together more than they have done, and to try to make an impact on the international stage. I have said somewhere in my book that if you look at all the big cases on international law argued before the courts, international court and major tribunals, they're dominated by American and Anglo-Saxon lawyers. But they are very bright international lawyers in our countries. But how to make a mark for themselves is one of the points that I've been thinking about. And that's why with Professor Tomiko we have started the Center for International Law in NUS. And hopefully we'll be able to interact with lawyers from Japan, Korea. I think we need the Asian international lawyers need greater recognition and in the international stage. Not because they're Asian, but they must be recognized on the merit. And I hope there'll be more forums or conferences where we can get the Asian international lawyers to interact with the established well-known international lawyers.
Our journal is a stable forum to express.
So these kinds of publications are
our consensus and recognition of the Asian lawyer and expressing the native voices of East Asia, not just East Asia as a different version of Western, but East Asia as from an independent point of view. Right. So, wow. So
does that cover it?
We had a very good time to take lessons from the senior international lawyer in Asia as well as in the world. So, sir, thank you very much for the long
thank you for the interview
and have given us some good opportunity. So I'd like to express the deepest appreciation to your kindness. Thank you very much.